Hi, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be redesigning Spectra Vondergeist. So starting out with her body type, I wanted it to be very skeletal and lanky because I wanted to go with that very corpse-like spooky look for a ghost character. For her mood board, I took inspiration from a lot of different classical favorite ghosts of mine. I wanted to go with the color palette of that 2000s trend of like every horror movie being that like aqua blue, that paranormal activity color, if you will. Some specific ghosts I took inspiration from were the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall and Jacob Marley, and I also took inspiration from various trad goth looks and Victorian silhouettes as well, since I feel like that's a very classic ghost era. So starting with the first redesign here, I went with these very long trailing ghosty sleeves and a bat's nest up top with a veil and a little poofy miniskirt and some big chunky boots. And earlier in the corner I was also experimenting with, do I want her to have legs or do I want her to have a trailing ghost body, but I ended up going with legs simply because of the fashion doll interchangeability aspect. For the second look I wanted to go with some big black ghosty eyes and a much more Victorian silhouette with some little cloaklet detailing up top. For the third look I wanted to go with some like sharp pointy bits at the bottom to get that sheet ghost look with a big ball chain, some heavy docks, and some ghost-like hair that's like covering her face but sprawled out at the bottom, and I also had the idea of these like big shoulder pads. For the fourth look, I wanted to focus again on that trad goth aesthetic, since I felt like the past two looks in this lineup were a bit more ghost focused, so I went with this extremely oversized spiked collar and this tight sort of Morticia Addams silhouette dress with all these rips and tears and tatters, because that was another aspect I wanted to incorporate into her design. I also wanted to, throughout the course of this, incorporate little details that imply how she died, specifically very subtle things, because I remember as a kid when her bed was released, there was like all these conspiracy theories of like, oh, the candles, she died in a fire, and obviously that's way too dark, but I wanted to include a lot of little references that people could extrapolate upon like that. For the fifth look here, I wanted to go with lots of different sheer layering and these big spikes on her shoulders again, because I want it to be sort of like unnatural, broken looking silhouette when I was experimenting with that. But ultimately, I ended up not going with that. All of her looks here ended up having that big drapey silhouette with a lot of loose flowing clothing, because I wanted to stress that floaty ghost-like nature, and the looser fitting the clothes, then the more you can play around with this sort of like dynamic, almost underwater look of ghosts. So I'm just writing out each of my favorite parts from each of these little 5 mini designs to combine into a more cohesive fifth look. Starting off, the first thing I wanted to do was include that little bandana tied around her neck, because it's very Jacob Marley, and the Day at the Mall fashion pack of Spectra has always been my favorite. And I wanted her to have a sort of floaty bat's nest sort of situation, where instead of being held up with hairspray and teasing, it's because of how floaty she is. I wanted her to have some big statement earrings that were shaped like little Ouija planchettes, and moving on to her outfit, I wanted to keep in mind the silhouette of this design. So starting off, I wanted her to have these really big, dramatic, oversized sleeves with these little chain hand gloves, because I wanted to incorporate a lot of clanking chains of ghosts all throughout her outfit. I also wanted to give her a pair of headphones and a parabolic microphone as an accessory, because I always liked that she was a gossip turned reporter, and I really liked the incorporation of that ghost lore of like ghost stories and like catching paranormal voices, it being incorporated into her personality of being nosy and always wanting a good story. So I definitely wanted to pay homage to that. For her skirt, I ended up going with this little mini bubble skirt situation that has a bunch of ruffles and bustles on it to incorporate that sort of Victorian look into this trad goth vibe. I wanted her to have these very witchy boots that have coffins and gravestones for heels, combined with some baggy loose socks. And on top of it, and underneath the miniskirt, is a like sheer piece, because I also wanted to incorporate a lot of sheer fabrics I also experimented with the idea of her having black glasses to sort of mimic the look of like a sheet ghost's eyes, but ended up thinking it was a little bit too busy for the design. I also wanted to incorporate some chains into her hairstyle. So I'm just racing out my color thumbnail palettes here. Wanted to keep it very dark with little hints of bone white in between. So that way when you look at her, it's kind of just like, you see like a shadow almost, similar to a lot of ghost sightings, you just see like a shape. So I definitely wanted her to have that flowing, floaty shape. I also grounded the palette. Here I was doing it a lot more purple because Spectra Vondergeist has just sort of like always been a purple character. When I try to go into these with not really specifically trying to redesign Spectra, but as if I was giving the prompt daughter of a ghost. And of course it's going to end up looking like Spectra because I've grown up with Monster High and it's like so thoroughly influenced my style. But I do try to take a less derivative direction for these. So I ended up later on tinting that palette to be more towards the original Paranormal Activity blue that I was talking about. For her makeup, I wanted it to be very trad goth, almost sort of like death metal-y, with these big dripping tear lines under very dramatic black eyeshadow to keep that sort of sheet ghost eye look, and the tears are very ghosty as well in my opinion. I ended up going with this periwinkle color for her hair, with chains and some chunky highlights throughout. This speed paint overall took me 4 hours, 37 minutes, and 7 seconds, not including the sketch and line art time, which is my third longest time for one of these, because if you see here, there's a lot of miniature, teeny tiny little chain links that I have to go in and color. And that took a very long time. And also what took a long time was having to color things that are underneath her skin and hands and all the sheer fabric, because I wanted her to have that semi-transparency going on. But I am ultimately very happy with all the detail in this piece. So just doing more flats, I went with this sort of green undertone to work as the black, so that way her palette remains cohesive and not everything is just like a flat black. I pretty much very rarely do any like plain white colors in my palettes, but for her I did use completely plain white to balance out her skin tone and bones in places. For the parabolic mic, I wanted to have a candle as the holder and then a bone as the shaft. For her top, it's a corset with a little bit of lacy detail, but ultimately a pretty simple piece with a rib cage chain halter over top. I also had a lot of fun with all the props in this piece, from her headphones to her mic to her laptop, and Ruin over at the side here. I wanted to draw Ruin a bit more realistically for a ferret and sort of almost make her look like a mongoose, as a reference to Jeff, another famous ghost creature. And in hindsight, I wonder if Ruin was a reference to that. For the sheer skirt here, this gave me so much trouble with the layers, trying to figure out how it was done right. But I saved that for last, and here you can see I'm doing the flame pattern on the crepe drapery that she has as a giant cloak to act as that ghost tail silhouette. On the underskirt, I wanted it to be this pale, sheer aqua color that's all tattered and torn, and this was, again, a nightmare to figure out the layers of how to do everything right, and I tried doing it like the right way, as in covering up all the parts that would be covered, and it ended up, I figured out, just looking better if I just sort of fudged it instead. So it's not 100% like realistically accurate, but it looks better than if it had been. For her screen background, I used a photo of the backdrop used at the MCR 2019 concert, and then just used the select tool to pull some glitches out of it and add a bit of chromatic aberration, so that way it incorporates that bit of lore that like ghosts cause glitches in technology into this piece somewhere. Because again, my favorite thing is just the amount of detail and thought that goes into Monster High designs, and that is very much reflected in my own style, but like turned up to a level that doesn't have to be obliged to the constrictions of budget and miniaturism. For her eyes, I wanted it to have the sort of crack down the pupil instead of a round pupil, to, again, give her more of that ghosty look, and of course keeping her natural at colors from G1 and G3. To keep the cool tones of her palette a bit balanced out, I decided to use that hot pink and red to add a bit of pops of color in her socks and the mic and Ruin, of course. I also, for the chains here, went with a almost sort of pearlescent sort of look instead of just strictly metallic. For her hair, I used a similar technique as to when I did Ghoulia's, so a bit of a rule for undead characters, but using the water brush tool in a very small amount to give it a sort of like scraggly and disheveled appearance to keep up with that creepiness. I also always have fun rendering hair and drawing it. It is my favorite thing, and especially when it is floaty and flowy like this. For the blacks, I wanted it to be a very shiny fabric to contrast how dark of a color it is in her palette, so that way it is a bit more visible and less just fading into the background. Here, when I was highlighting the laptop, I realized that adding yellow as a highlighting color looked really good as a way to contrast all of the cool tones. So I went throughout all of the purple and brown and red throughout her palette and added green, yellow as a highlight there to keep everything cohesive instead of clashing. For the bustles on her skirt, I wanted to do a lot of like crazy counter shading, so I went in with all these colors so it's almost sort of like a holographic looking material to keep up with that sort of, imagine like if you took a photo of this spectra with flash, it would just be like completely reflective, which I feel like is very ghosty, at least to my brain. I had a lot of fun then doing the laciness of her big trad goth sleeves. It just did some random swirly patterns. It wasn't as precise as with Rochelle because, again, they are serving different purposes here, where Rochelle's was to look very structured and neat. Spectra's purpose of the lace is to make her look dated in a way, and disheveled and undead. So I had a lot of fun adding little bits of like holes and tattering throughout her outfit, and I ended up completely changing the color of her sleeves from what I had thumbnailed them as, and instead of just being a solid semi-sheer black, they instead turned it into this holographic, almost rainbow look with this lace patterning over top. For the background, I used a spooky picture of a random building I took on a night walk, and then added her and Ruin's glows, of course. I wanted hers to be that paranormal activity blue for the third time, and Ruin's to be a contrasting fuchsia. Then adding the final sparkling details, and now it's the reveal. I really love how this piece turned out. I especially had a lot of fun with the poses for her just coming off of February. I enjoyed her doing a bit more of a like active listening pose instead of just showing off the fashions that she's wearing like I usually do. So I feel like the sleeves are a little bit less like displayed as if they were to be more of an advertisement for the character, but I really like how this came out as a piece, so let me know what you guys think. So here's a comparison between her G1 design, her G3 design, and my redesign. I feel like there's a lot of similarities between these three designs. Like I feel like they're all sort of like the same design but interpreted through different people's styles, which I really love. I also really enjoy that I got to include Ruin in this, and maybe I'll include more pets in the future. I also have to say I love when ghosts glow, so I'm really happy I was able to incorporate that usual background piece and just turn it into a part of her character instead. Now for the lineup, this is the group 2 because if you haven't heard in previous videos, I can't include all of them in one screen anymore because it is too big of a file and it's too long to see anything. So here's this group of all of these sort of like what I would consider season 2 Monster High characters together, with her listening in on the gossip between Jackson and Hold. I really love all of the characters here. They're really close to my heart because this is like the era when these characters were introduced that I got into Monster High, so all of these people are like so iconic to me. I love them. So there is my final redesign again, so you can look at all of her details. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments below. Next month is going to be speed paint because May is going to be a very large video of finishing up a part 2 of my mermaid designs from last year. So be sure to check out the previous year's video and look forward to my videos for the upcoming months as well. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, comment down below if you have something to say. I love hearing what you guys think. And subscribe if you'd like to see videos from me once a month. And also be sure to follow me on my art Instagram, where I upload art at least 3 times a month with extra doodles and bonuses in my stories along the way. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!